Hey everyone, James Azar here with the CyberHub Engage virtual summit in the time of quarantine and social distancing and so many of our challenging times. Another piece of content, one that you're absolutely going to love because I'm with two amazing people who are joining me now. I've got Nick Harrahill, VP Global Operations at Synack, and Greg McCord, the Senior Director of Information Security at CalAmp. Guys, welcome to the virtual summit of all lifetimes.
Thanks for having me.
This content, 30 years from now, our grandkids are going to look at this content online and wonder, what from a virus?
Mm-hmm. Sit in for 2 weeks because of a virus. Yeah, who would have known?
Who would have thunk it, right? Yeah. And this panel of ours has a very interesting kind of topic. We're talking about the executive's point of view, how to secure your organization while transitioning to a remote workforce. I think it's safe to say for all of us here that no one's business continuity plan had self-quarantine, not going to the office for more than a few days in it, right?
I think that's 100% right.
I think that's a safe kind of assumption here. So looking at kind of these recent unprecedented events, have you guys seen a shift in your organization's perceptions or even your customers' perceptions of your security teams? And I think Greg will kick this off with you, and then we'll let Nick kind of pitch in there towards the end, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. There has been a shift. So, I mean, before, for example, like CalAmp, information security has always been important for us. But obviously the work from home meant something completely different. So, yeah, for our customer security is a differentiator. But also internally now we had to really work on our internal processes around physical security. A lot of those enterprise security measures that we felt were traditional items, and now they're back to the forefront again, as well as for our customers. So how do we measure kind of that risk? Because all that risk is now shifted out to the endpoint. So all that stuff we're talking about, VPNs, CASB, URL filtering, DLP policies, all that stuff now, not from a company laptop, but now you even got to consider BYOD. Even more so today than you did, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. Crazy thoughts. So all the stuff that InfoSec was saying, hey, look, we were right. So
that's a really good point, because it seems like, at RSA just a month ago, and Nick, you were at RSA, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I think I saw you because we were at Fogo de Chao together, just hanging out, eating meat. And
eating too much.
Yeah, way too much, man. And then I went to Israel a week later. Like, no idea how much weight I've put on in those 2 weeks.
Different times.
Oh man.
Yeah. But Nick, how are you? You guys, obviously, your workforce is traditionally all over the place. So you guys were a little bit more kind of suited for this. But how have you guys been dealing with this?
Yeah, as you said, as far as the way we deliver our services to our customers, it's pretty much business as usual. Our Synack Red team are located all over the world, and we've facilitated testing for them in a way that they can do so securely from wherever they're at. For us as a company, we also already have quite a few folks that are remote. We're kind of a mix of in office as well as remote workers. But within that, pretty much business as usual as well. But it actually served as a nice time to reinforce the proper business practices when we're working remotely. It was also a good time to provide some education around phishing, since this COVID event, it's kind of like tax season where the crooks out there are trying to take advantage through phishing and things like that. So hasn't been real disruptive, other than not being able to see my coworkers in the office.
And that human interaction a lot of times is key to innovation, right? I mean, you think of this transition, Christmas break, when people break for a week or two and kind of go home and travel. We're prepped for that. We know it's coming. We run those phishing tests. We were planning for it. This is sudden, it's global, and it's it's no opportunity to even plan ahead for it. How are you guys, how have you guys been doing to support this transition over the last several weeks?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So a lot of it's been, when you look towards information security, most folks look at us as kind of the calm, the ones that follow the process. We're already looking at the risk. And as I mentioned earlier, they're doing that even more so today. So as they move towards that transition, they're looking at, hey, Greg, what are we doing to protect all the endpoints? How are we doing to protect our offices? But now the other component is, what about the teams? So how about your personnel? How's everyone doing? Do you got enough support? And I think, James, like you and I were talked about, I think all of us here have talked about our military backgrounds. In the military, we generally take care of our personnel, our teams, and that's one of the first questions we ask. Hey, how's everyone doing? Do we need support? Is anything going on? Do I need to drive out there? I can't drive out there anymore, but I can maybe order something on Amazon and have it sent out or something like that, right? So I think that's probably one of the key points. You've got to be able to take care of the teams, keep them engaged. I think there's even a discussion around Agile. So whatever methodology you have for engaging those teams, keep them engaged and just have a daily stand-up. You can do it Scrum, or you can do it, I don't know if you can do Kanban, post up a board, but just keep everyone engaged. And knowing that if you take a look at, from an executive perspective, how teams interact, whether in the office. So let's say you come back from like a 2-week break, you're able to bounce off new and unique ideas. So how do you do that virtually now? And then understanding team dynamics, like forming, storming, norming, and performing. So like, what are those processes? So if you just hired somebody, how's the storming phase going to work when you're on a camera, right? Like, are they going to be able to contribute, or are they going to resist? And you may or may not be able to see facial reactions, right? So there's a lot of nuances you have to consider. And I think when you take a look at whatever be a CISO or head of information security, they're kind of looked at to kind of help provide that guidance, because we sit on the line of technical and business minded. It's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to Greg's point around engagement, a lot of the same things at Synack. I'm used to, me and a lot of other personalities like myself in the office are used to just being able to walk across the hall and engage IT, engineering, whoever I need to. And my personality is kind of fits that, where I've worked with these folks for a while. I can just walk up to them, work things out, find solutions, and it has been a bit of an adjustment for all of us. So not just doing, we collaborate online quite a bit already through our various channels, and we've made a point of it just to make sure that for the energy and a lot of what drives those energy that are driven from those in-person engagements, we've made sure that people are remembering to do that online. You can't have that discussion at the coffee maker in the morning with somebody from another team like you used to, but just making sure that they're remaining engaged even though we're all remote, just so that the relationship management and person-to-person and human interactions are maintained there.
I think that's the biggest challenge with all of this, right? Is that human interaction, that collaboration, that intel you would get from DevOps about something they may have, spun up, that they may have like not followed procedure and, spinning up an Elasticsearch and, putting some data out there. They were testing it yesterday. It wasn't a big deal. They're building buildings, but no one's breaking them down. And I think this is, I think some of the fallout of all of this is going to be just how important those policies and procedures were. Because in the office, like you said, Nick, so greatly, grab a cup of coffee, you see someone at DevOps, hey, what's happening? Oh yeah, what are you guys working on? You get that intel, you go back, you go, we should probably check that. You check it, you take it down, you fix it. You remind people of the standards and you move forward. Now that almost doesn't exist because teams are communicating within their own teams. You're not getting those side conversations.
Right, exactly.
So what security
Right.
tools are you? What security tools or protocols? Greg, have you implemented
Mhm.
that have made this transition a little bit easier for your guys' team?
Yeah, I think well, obviously VPNs are really there for everyone, right? And I think every IT team or InfoSec team has already kind of had that kind of built mindset built in. But when you start thinking about like DLP at an endpoint, as you start thinking about what are those CASB solutions, right?
Uh-huh.
And going back to your previous comment, you were mentioning, well, the dev teams are spinning stuff up and doing things without telling us. Well, what about those cloud compliance platforms that you can apply to the cloud, whether it be AWS, GCP, or Azure, right? That you can see those things happening. So like a Dome 9 or a Cloud Prisma or a Fugue, for example, right? They all essentially do the same thing where they toss out the alerts. And then if you've integrated security into your CI/CD, I guess, pipeline, then you can also build on a lot of those alerts. So and that's really where Synack comes in, is you can through the continuous 365, and correct me if I'm wrong on the actual sales buzzwords, but where you can integrate it into the platform, and then you can see kind of the output, and you can toss it in kind of any place in the environment, right? So I think some of the stuff that we've implemented before has been great, but now I think for CalAmp and LoJack, it's been more of the procedural administrative stuff that we have to continually review for like physical security access. So falling back on more of the traditional. My advice for companies that are moving from traditional to a work from home scenario, just leverage some of the same practices you have internally. Don't make it overly complex, but leverages those same security tenets and keep working through that. And be prepared for change, because this is a truly unique time in our society. So be prepared for change.
Well, Nick.
Yeah. So Greg brought up a lot of great points around endpoint controls, VPN, DLP. Just to add a few points to that, at Synack we've had a lot of great controls that have been rolled out and have worked pretty seamlessly. What we've done at this point is, since it's offered us that opportunity to also reintroduce the policy to everybody, just to make sure that they know why these controls are in place. So we're not just doing the technical end of controls, but the administrative end from like a training and awareness perspective, so that people aren't just aware that the controls are there, but how they help us work securely. And just thinking from my past life, when I used to do operations security at a large financial company that had a very large customer service organization, and I'm glad that I'm not there right now, because I can just imagine the BCP scenarios they're going through right now. But in that aspect, it's very different from putting an engineer at home versus putting a customer service agent at home. Somebody that is touching customer data on a as part of their job, and servicing customers, things like that. In that aspect, we had to apply security at the job level, where these customer service agents, if we had to shift them home, they would be working like through a thin client or something like that, where we're applying much more restrictive controls to help secure that.
Do you feel like that impacts productivity and the employees' interaction with technology at that point? Because a lot of times when we do restrictive on employees, as a CISO, right, my help desk gets a bunch of calls from people that are really frustrated because they're already frustrated they can't be at work, and now they've been taken out of their routine. Do you feel like that restriction also does tend to like impact employees as well?
And I'll go back to a point that Greg made. We should make it so that when they're in the office versus out of the office, that it should be pretty much the same. And that's the goal as well, is, we want to, and I'll again go back to my previous experience. And I remember this is like way back in like 2005, when endpoint agents were a little bit more heavy and noisy. I recall us pushing out endpoint agents to help secure this type of work, and it blue screening a number of customer service agents. So, the goal of what we're doing in security is so that, we should do things securely, but also, not provide any type of obstacles so people don't try to bypass that or it impacts their productivity.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, Greg, so I've got a question for you here. I'll kind of have you lead this. So a lot of, I don't know about you, but I think when we were talking a little bit before we started, executive leadership calling like, hey, how do we start really addressing the issue of security? And you brought it up very early on in this session, which is BYOD, home networks. By the way, kids are home. For those who don't have kids, kids are home, working, studying, not so much, streaming.
I think that's what you call it.
Yeah.
Minecraft isn't working.
Yeah, Minecraft isn't working. TikTok isn't really working. Doing all these crazy things. But what can CISOs do to really continue to build security across their organizations? What are some of the things you're really doing to kind of spread security now? Because even the implementation of tools now, you don't have a physical laptop to touch it or a device to do it. You're almost walking your employees through security at this point.
Yeah. So going back earlier, when Nick was chatting, actually my son came in and I thought I was doing a really good job there. I was like looking up, pointing my finger, go out the door. But anyway, yeah, it's I think the key component is communicate, and kind of provide that structure. And if process orientated kind of working environments are a challenge, I mean, find other people who can help you out there, like legal. They love this stuff.
Legal thrives on this. Lawyers are billing by the hour right now. Rates are at 25% extra because of hazard.
Exactly. So, I mean, providing that structure through the communication, making it consistent, and then spreading that security message. I mean, I generally did it internally in the organization. We all did it in the military, right? We had a very rigid kind of process orientation that we did on a day-to-day basis. But now, like I mentioned earlier, it's like this whole thing has changed. But I think being that kind of calm stability within the organization, so yes, the risk is changing. Look, board members, the risk is changing. We get it. But here's our plan, how to approach it. And yeah, here's my strategy, what it was a month ago, and here's what I reported. And here's how it's going to stay the same. And here are some of the changes. So it's kind of, you're walking into the room with a little bit more gravitas than normal because there's a lot of things that we've been mentioning and now here they are. But it's continuing to follow within that strategy and keep that strategy alive through the communication. And there's one key component. We were talking about kind of the operational side of this, and now that people have moved to their home offices in BYOD, you've got your team for the first few weeks, to hopefully not for much longer than this, but they've got to be ready and willing to jump in and participate and help. At the end of the day, yeah, we're information security, right? But it's still one team, one fight. We're all part of the same team, and we have to be willing to jump in and kind of help our processes as well as their processes. So ticket comes in, you got to respond nearly immediately. And then that gives that assurance to the person sitting at home. Oh, look, wow, they are still there. So.
Absolutely. Nick, what are your thoughts? What can CISOs be doing?
Yeah, I mean, this is like really prime time for a lot of these things that we prepare for, and
I almost want to put in like Monday Night Football music.
Yeah, I mean, I recall in years past working with a very passionate BCP leader that we would do tabletop exercises, and I remember one of them being a pandemic. I mean, this was at another company, but when this came up, this reinforced a lot of those lessons I learned years ago. Just making sure that, as a security organization, that we've enabled our workforce to, first of all, work securely, but secondly, making sure that they're able to work in a way where they can collaborate, they're productive, and all of these things that we worry about from a security perspective, and the controls that we placed for those aren't inhibiting any of those processes. So I think that this is actually a really great time to showcase what we do in security.
Yeah, I feel like this has put security back where it needs to be. And hopefully it steps up the CISO's role in C-suite leadership, right? Because for a lot of CISOs, we've always kind of been under the CIO or the general counsel. And I'm hoping this kind of brings a CISO in direct contact with his CEO, and the CEO goes, yeah, I'm probably going to need this guy right next to me going forward. He should be at that same table with my CFO and COO and even my chief risk officer.
Exactly.
That's where I need my CISO, not hiding another layer under my CIO, who may report to my CFO, who then reports to me. And those kind of you get it, Greg, you get it. I mean, it's so true. This thing is just it's we're watching this pandemic and what it's doing to business and people. And I think we've all talked about people, but what are some of the and Nick, I'll kind of defer this one to you quickly, but what are some of our best practices from organizations with a distributed workforce? As VP of Global Operations at Synack, like you said early on, we're a pretty distributed workforce. Yeah, we've got an office, but a predominant part of your workforce is all over the place. So what are some of your best practices?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with communication. As an operations team, obviously we are constantly communicating, collaborating. It's how we support our clients. So communication, we have to, people have to be engaged, and, that's an expectation. So we have, collaborative tools that allow us to communicate, collaborate on whatever it is that we need to work on. So making sure that both the communication and collaboration on those tools are all secured, but just moving to kind of going back to that human level, it's just engagement. We have our regular stand-up meetings and other meetings that are very tactical, and making sure that, we're on point with what we have to deliver on today, this week, this year, or whatever the case may be. But engagement on the human level is just, when you're distributed, things can easily get lost, when it comes to personal interaction and making sure people are doing okay. And, especially with an event like this, hopefully people don't get very sick, but at the very least, most people have had some type of disruption in their lives, whether it's because they're quarantined at home where they may not be as comfortable working from, or they have their kids at home and they're trying to balance that. Just making sure from an engagement perspective that, that people are okay, that they have the right support that they need. And we're kind of gauging the temperature of our workforce.
When you look at this from an attack surface perspective right now, and a distributed workforce obviously now creates a whole new level of an attack surface. Greg, how are you kind of approaching that new attack surface, and what are some of your best practices around trying to reduce that as much as possible right now?
Yeah, I mean, at CalAmp, we've been kind of looking at that expanded kind of threat landscape for a while now, because we really deal with IoT and stolen vehicle recovery type of scenarios within LoJack as well. So we're talking millions of devices that are out there. And I think the biggest challenge has always been, whether it be from a printer internally into your network to that IoT device that has a camera that somebody's never told anyone about, is understanding that it's actually there. So it's the visibility component, right? And then understanding when you got the visibility, we start talking about NIST CSF. So it's the cybersecurity framework, right? So we identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, right? So now I've identified what it is, and then I put the protection controls in place where feasible, right? Obviously, if you have a small IoT device, it's not going to work because it could be 8 to 16 bits. So you take it back to the next mile and try to get as much information as possible. But yeah, so once you've had those protection controls in place, you really got to make sure that you're watching for those separate anomalies and then acting upon it. Hopefully it's automated, because like my team, I have a very small team. They can't sit there and sift through millions of lines of alerts a day. So we outsource that to some smart folks like Synack to kind of help us push through a lot of that stuff. And then it's kind of typical that from that point on, you have an incident response process that you follow through, and then you recover from it all. But I think one of the biggest points, and Nick, you mentioned this earlier, is like, where do I put all that information to? So now I know what my attack surface is. I know what that threat landscape is. Put all this stuff in place to see it. Where's kind of that central point, and it's really the collaboration with everyone else in your team is like, look, what works for your team? And maybe it's SharePoint, maybe it's Confluence, maybe it's whatever. But all that information sharing is even more important now, and access to that information to the right folks.
Yeah, I mean, that attack surface has increased. Obviously, having remote. I was on a conference call a few nights ago with about 25 CISOs, from all over the country. We were just chit-chatting, and one of the discussions that a lot of us were talking about was not everyone's getting a reprieve from their auditing and getting it done. And when you're used to having on-prem testing, you're now you can't have on-prem testing, and because that's just doesn't exist anymore. And if you're bringing them in, someone's got to be there. And how do you do social distancing? And so how are we kind of, how do we start kind of approaching that I guess I want to say the new attack surface from a layered security control perspective? Nick, do you kind of want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just mainly thinking from input and interactions with customers is, this does change a lot of focus on where clients were worrying about where they could be vulnerable. As we're shifting folks home, points like data storage, how they authenticate, all these different things that could become vulnerable with a distributed workforce are becoming points of focus for our clients. So, those layered security controls, starting with not just your, just across the board. I won't even only focus on the technical, but what I talked about earlier with administrative controls for a workforce, making sure that, everybody understands the policies, but then going down to, the actual technical controls, making sure that folks can authenticate securely, that they can connect to their VPN, they know when to connect to their VPN, know where their data storage should be, making sure that as a company, our distributed workforce isn't planning stuff on repositories outside of company control, things like that. So I think a lot, at least the feedback I've gotten from clients in the initial weeks of this has been, they've been doing a lot of focus internally on those types of things, kind of just controlling that internal and kind of like employee and internal tools driven attack surface.
So kind of taking that into consideration, I guess, Greg, what role does security testing play in your organization in general, but specifically now in kind of this point in period of time? And I kind of, for people who are watching and listening, I want to say this. It's now end of March. People will be listening to this April 2nd at our virtual summit. And the Corona isn't going to go away in May, because people say it's going to go away in May. This is a new type of flu. Until there's a vaccine to deal with it and you're able to eradicate it, it's going to be around. The flu season's going to come right back around in the fall, and we're going to be in a similar situation now, only we'll have a lot more prep time to do it. So how do you start planning for security testing now and for the future? And then how does it all play into your team, Greg?
Yeah, and this is really where the relationship management comes in, right? So especially with a CISO type role in an organization, you're going to want to build those relationships, one with the CFO, with the head of legal, or whoever in legal, whoever the influencers are, right? And then how to, one, if you've already submitted your yearly plan, how do we compensate for kind of the change in the environment? And then taking a look at how you've approached that testing today. Let's say you've done it on an annual basis. I mean, like, what are the certain things that are going to change from a work from home perspective? One thing I've been doing with CalAmp is I've kind of switched it more away from more of an annual type of penetration testing and done something that's what I've coined internally attack simulation. So tying it into those day-to-day processes so that we don't have to stop everything, do an annual pen test, go through the exercise a month later, hopefully it's not a month later, and then remediating or mitigating a lot of those risks, right? So then when you start thinking about attack simulation, now it's a whole different ballgame. It opens up, well, hopefully it doesn't open up anything. It actually closes the door on a lot of threats, but it opens up a whole new line of thinking in terms of trying to get ahead of that risk, whether it be from working from home, because if you're in attack simulation, those folks that are security researchers are trying to get in from new and unique ways, and you're starting to see that now. But yeah, I mean, it's a completely different ballgame today, and I think having that kind of change mindset in terms of how we do that type of testing, it's not only going to help the organizations that have done it already, but I think if we connect with other CISO leaders and provide that information across the board, I think it's going to be crucial for those leaders to kind of link that together and kind of include that into their annual strategy.
Yeah, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that we talked a little bit earlier about this being prime time for security, and I agree with Greg that the lessons learned that are pulled out of here are things that should be taken forward. This isn't just like this great social experiment of everybody sitting at home, but it is a great experiment for security as well, as how our controls have held up, how we were able to manage an expanding attack surface, as well as how we supported our employees throughout it. But then lastly, I mean, the tricky thing for a security team at this point is, you have to maintain business as usual, whether you're like a compliance person, you work in a SOC, whatever domain of security you work in. With this disruption, we still have to maintain those controls, so it'll be a good test for those as well.
So Nick, kind of staying with you for a minute, and then I want to get back to Greg because I got a really good question for you, Greg. It's good.
Can't wait.
I promise. But Nick, what are some of your key components of an agile virtual work team?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I myself have been in roles before where I've been completely remote versus splitting time between remote and in the office. But key components, I mean, would include folks that are collaborative in nature. You can't be, you may be an introvert and prefer to work from home and not in an office, but you can't be an introvert when it comes to that required collaboration. So if I have people spread out all over the globe, I want to make sure that we all connect in whatever ways possible, either through online engagement, phone calls. You really have to know how people are best engaged. I have some employees that prefer just to call me on the phone, which is great, versus others, though, that will just hit me on IM or whatever the case may be. So it's making sure that people are engaged, making sure that they have the right tools to work remotely as an Agile virtual team, but also making sure that as an Agile virtual team, some of the things that get sacrificed with that are those opportunities to work and interact with other parts of the business. I want to make sure that they are connected in some ways to those other folks, whether it be through, just occasional in-person meetings or matching them up on projects, just so that even though I may be a remote member, working from the UK that doesn't always get to meet or work with the marketing team, that, they will have that opportunity to work with them so that everybody's kind of tied into the same business goals.
Yeah, it seems like as we're going through this situation, this epidemic that's really taken a toll on a lot of people's lives. And you're right. I mean, there's the aspect of security in this. I think there's also the aspect of humanity in all of this, and the fact that you've got some of these threat actors that are taking advantage of this to really kind of go after organizations, and it's almost shameless. I said this on a live on Tuesday, on a LinkedIn live. I had about 30 or 40 attacks, like phishing emails, sent my way for calling out the bad guys for what they really are, which is, hey, you know, white flag for a little bit, take a break, relax. You know, you don't. This is global. This isn't, you know, one country versus another. This is, you know, everyone, and I think all of us work in organizations that are global. And so while we here are blessed to be in the greatest country on earth, the US of A, as Borat would say, right? There are other people who are in other countries that have less resources. I mean, we're seeing stuff that comes out of the news out of Europe and so forth. I mean, when Greg, you kind of look at this from a distributed workforce kind of place, how does this change of security planning based on geographical location?
Well, from the words of the late Jedi Master Yoda, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. I mean, I've got an office out in Italy, so there's a lot of fear. I haven't seen much in terms of has that fear translated to anything else. But yeah, I think just across the organization, there's just a ton of fear. So how do I address the fear? So when I'm addressing the fear, one, I've got to change my work schedule. I mean, it already has, since I have a European office kind of footprint. But now I've got to make sure my schedule compensates to allow for that engagement that I do here in Irvine, California. I do the same for my European teams. I have to be willing to engage. I have to be willing to step up to the plate and shine. As Nick mentioned earlier, this is the prime time, right? So how do I help from a global transition perspective? I mean, it's still the same. For me internally, I'm just moving those processes out to the endpoints, even globally. But now I have to really consider GDPR, those different types of privacy regulations. So the types of things that I'm doing from a tooling perspective in the United States, I have to think about it. Thank God for CCPA. Now, generally the same for GDPR, right? So from my perspective, it's the same. I got to be engaged. I have to lead from the front, kind of be that calm voice in the storm. Try not to incite fear and incite panic. In my conversation when my son comes running in, saying that, you know, he got a diamond sword in Minecraft. I mean, it's, I mean, the world's crazy, right? So the world's really crazy right now. So it's just trying to help out everyone the best you can. And going back to your point, I mean, it's team humanity here. So all the attacks that are coming to them in Europe and the attacks are coming to us in the United States. And also, I mean, we have to deal with that and respond appropriately.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I think, Nick, when you guys look at it, I mean, just in some of the previous sessions in our summit, you know, we've been talking about your distributed global workforce at Synack and how, you know, different people are impacted differently. You know, the SRTs that are, you know, in Italy or Spain or other places have a very different outlook on this than maybe some of us here do, and people in China and India and Hong Kong and Taiwan and Japan look at this completely different than some other places. It's global, but I think it also kind of reshapes security. I think there's a new cyber paradigm coming, and this is the kickoff for it.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and you know, fortunately at Synack, the way our platform and our model was developed was that, you know, we are doing crowdsourced security pen testing. So, you know, if unfortunately there was a large outage that took out a large part of the internet infrastructure in, you know, one part of the world, and you know, that would disable the ability for our Synack red teamers in that region to connect to our platform. We have that contingency of other folks around the world that can, you know, while we wait for those folks to get back online. But you're exactly right in that it does change paradigm when people think about different things like supply chain management, different types of service disruption. And again, going back to my previous experience in operations security at the financial services company, we would typically look at things from the perspective of, if I were to, stand up a call center in whatever part of the world, what type of natural disasters are they prone to that could knock out service for a while? And we would measure things at that kind of very focused level. Whereas, right now with this pandemic, it's global, it's worldwide. So it's going to touch everybody in some sense. And I think it's a big eye opener for everybody.
Yeah, I also wanted to jump in there real quick, James. Yeah, Nick, there was a great point you brought up around supply chain and kind of the impact that this has had, I think, globally in supply chain. And then you talk about all the distribution that follows in behind it, right? I think when I look at it from an information security perspective, I think a lot of this stuff is going to come, what's the word I want to use, come to light a little bit more in terms of supply chain security. Because now, I mean, we've kind of heard the conversations in the past, like, okay, well, this might disrupt this might disrupt that. We're seeing attacks here to this. Well, now everyone's at home, they're focused, they're lasered in, and now look, we have a pandemic that's disrupted it. Then you're starting to see the attacks that are starting to do further disruption in terms of like grids and everything else like that. It's fascinating, but it also brings that to light that there needs to be a greater focus for information security there. And I know here at CalAmp, we've kind of put the visibility down, like I keep talking about, like more or less the engineering side, but how do you get supply chain visibility, and how do you get tooling and platforms and start working on your agreements and all that other stuff at that level too? And which is really the BCP comes in as well. It's kind of how do you walk through the exercises that Nick was talking about.
Yeah, I think there's a very interesting thing with this, which is when boards are able to get back together and they're sitting in a room for the very next time, and for people, some people, there's going to be that CISO in the room, and that is going to be your Jerry Maguire moment, show me the money moment. Yeah. Your fate as a CISO, your budget, your challenges, your inherent asks are all going to be on the line that very first board meeting when this is all over the summer. When you're sitting in that room with, the board members, and they're asking you, so this is going to come back in October, November, December. What do we need? And inherently not using FUD and going over some of this. It's funny. Someone was asking me earlier today. They said, "Hey, James, how are you? What are you doing with all this stuff?" And I said, "I've got a notebook of all the stuff I'm doing right, and I've got an even thicker notebook of all the stuff I need to do better." And I go, when I finish my workday for about an hour every night, I look at everything that we need to do better and start to look at that, because inherently you look at this stuff and you realize, well, we're not going to go back to traditional. Traditional just isn't going to exist anymore. The Synack model of crowdsourced security testing is the future of security testing. It's front and center, because you can't have pen tester, you can't have security testing in your facility anymore. People are moving to the cloud. You don't need to be physical. AWS ain't exactly opening a data center and telling you, hey, come on in here and pen test these servers, right? So I mean, that's the future we live in. So I want to end our discussion though on a positive note. And so I'm going to ask you guys because so many people are focusing on all the things that are going on. And I like to leave, I like to give people chocolate at the end of a discussion. Just give them something sweet, to kind of leave optimistic, because we've spoken about a lot of different things, some which, we've spoken about fear, and we've spoken about kind of changing the paradigm and the work we need to do, and kind of a lot of different stuff. But from an executive perspective on both of your ends, what's kind of one good thing that's come out of all of this that you can take forward that you go, wow, maybe this wasn't a risk we were willing to take, but now that we've been forced to it, it's really been positive. So I think we'll start with Nick, and then we'll end with Craig, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So, this this basically forced us into, putting everybody remote, and it really proved that it hasn't been disruptive to us. It's disruptive in the fact that I don't, get to see people in the office and have that in-person personal interaction. But what we found as far as when it comes to our delivery of services, people being engaged, our customers even being engaged, it hasn't had any impact to all of that. So, it's been very positive from the experiment in that regard.
And I will bring it to you, Greg. One positive thing that you've taken out of this whole thing so far that you go, wow, this is actually a good thing.
It showed that security is a business enabler.
Amen.
Good point.
Amen. That was short and sweet, but like they say, it's perfect. It actually is. And guys, I want to thank you so much for doing this. I mean, it's awkward for people to think of the idea of doing this virtually. We think of conferences, we think of virtual, we think of summits, we think of being able to shake hands and do all kinds of stuff. We were elbow bumping at RSA. I don't know, Nick, were you elbow bumping at RSA?
Yeah.
I mean, I was elbow bumping. We had a good group of people over there, and so it was fun. I will tell you this one thing, and I want to mention this because when we were at RSA at Fogo de Chao with our friends over at Synack, I had Michael Maxman, who's the CISO for the city of San Francisco, and one of the things we spoke about in the podcast at the time was emergency preparedness for CISOs. And it was right at the verge. It was the day that the city of San Francisco declared a state of emergency during RSA. No one knew at RSA that the city had declared a state of emergency. It was kind of like hidden. It's almost like Google came in and blocked that part of Moscone Center. So no one really heard about it unless you went outside that perimeter. And it was very interesting to hear him talk about it. And he said one thing, and I kind of want to sign off on that because I think it's very, very, very enlightening. He said, as CISOs, we've come to realize that we're no longer that last door in the basement corridor that's in charge of making sure that your URL filtering and your phishing tests. We're the guys that are sitting right out there right now. And in this emergency preparedness, we're the ones that are coordinating all the technologies that need to be used to save lives, to enhance city operations. And in our organizations right now, I think Greg said it perfectly. Everyone's looking at us going like, how do we do this? Like, how do we make sure that hackers don't get into our business and criminals aren't able to take advantage of it from a physical and a cyber point of view? Again, arguing the point that a CISO should be a CSO, period. No I. Guys, thank you so much. I kind of wanted to sign off on that because that was the one thing you said, Greg, just so spot on to think of that, going on at that time when we're at Fogo de Chao, at RSA, with the friends over at Synack. By the way, great meet. I don't know. Greg, were you at RSA?
I was actually at Fogo de Chao my first day. I was there. I actually didn't even go in the convention center. I was there the whole time. So.
Yeah, I was there the whole time too. And then Thursday I had to go record from like the press area. Let me tell you, man, not fun. No, just not fun. So, I will say, I'm sure Jay and Mark are going to watch it. So I told Mark in one of our earlier sessions here today, Fogo de Chao again next year, but all week. All week, dominate that facility.
So much good food there.
It's good, but you just want to go hibernate after a full day of it.
Yeah, but it's okay to go hibernate.
Yeah,
it's okay. It's absolutely fine. We're now all hibernating at our homes while working. So in the mood of hibernation, I want to say thank you guys so much for joining us here. Greg, thank you so much. Nick as well. Folks, there's so much more coming your way in our virtual summit. We have so much more content coming through right after this, but we're going to take a short break, let you go fix yourself a Hot Pocket, grab your can of Coke, kiss your kids, and come back for more right after this break. Until next time, folks, thanks so much, and we'll be back right after the break.